If you've not been living under a rock, you know that the conclusion of Attack on Titan's story is incredibly polarizing. There are those that hate it, those that love it, and even those who have found a new appreciation of it. Interestingly, an alternative fan ending that has been released under the name No Requiem aimed to mitigate these squabbles, but has potentially only been more divisive. Since I have reviewed the ending of the story already and part 2 of the final season, it feels appropriate for me to do the same with this fan creation and see where its merits lie and where they don't. Instantly, I will note that the artwork of No Requiem is something to admire. In many cases, it's better than Issyama's own work, maintaining the grunge look that fits very well to the tone of the story, whilst adding the polish and consistency the original art lacks. Paneling is also genuinely superb and is not just brownie points to the eventual butts you may be anticipating. Combine that with elements of the writing actually being well done, and you have aspects such as the explanation of the hallucinogen delivered far more effectively than the original. Of course, that doesn't mean Issyama's was bad, just that No Requiem in this instance does a better job. Zeke's presentation of Ymir is also very well done and is in keeping with the character's very nihilistic outlook on life, questioning the need for meaning and frustrated at Ymir's push to defy the inevitable fate of death. Learning more about her character through his commentary also enables this story to flesh out the tragedy of her life, but also reasoning. The original relied a lot on interpretive meaning, focusing on showing, not telling. The problem that arose as a result of this is summed up with the glare she would have from afar. Some interpreted it as admiration that hints at her twisted form of love for the king, while for others, it was suggesting that she was resenting him from afar. No Requiem chooses to have no room for interpretation and would rather tell you the answer. And yes, though it's an open-ended answer, it definitely guides the reader's conclusion. Therefore, the storytelling can come across as quite telling, forcing narrative ideas with no headroom for interpretation for the reader. It's important to treat the audience with respect so that they can pick up on certain visual clues. Attack on Titan has always balanced this aspect flawlessly. Regardless, I think the best solution to both of these was how MAPPA handled it in the anime. The cinematic presentation of Ymir's life was tragic but also carried a feeling of longing. The anime amplified this sense of her wanting to be loved so badly that she misplaced those feelings onto the king. What is more, it's clear by her visual unhappiness that she was suffering, and with what we learn later in the manga about her loving the king, she was most possibly confused as to why someone she thinks she loves is causing her so much pain. This is why at the end of the day, I believe she committed this act, a way for the king to show some sort of love back, and when he didn't, she had enough and lost her will. The anime does a great job of adding this further meaning that guides our interpretations, but also allows us to still come up with our own answers, instead of force-feeding a narrative. Moving on, although in No Requiem we get this fantastic panel, it lacks the substance, impact, and symbology of the original due to the inclusion of adult Eren. In Issyama's version, we see him in his youthful form lap up the rumbling and the world he paves in his mind. However, that also means he is also purposely ignoring the blood-curdling screams of oppression below. In fact, the steam that is burning people is presented as clouds above from his perspective. He is literally shielding himself from seeing the death he is causing. In that moment, Issyama presents him with all that youthful ignorance. It's a small touch that is one of my favourite details in Attack on Titan because of the tragic symbology of Eren's state of mind. All of that is gone in No Requiem, in favour to have Eren look like a Chad, look cool and epic as an adult. I don't really get it. It's a nice panel, but the meaning is astronomically inferior to the original. It's like the original Lion King that has everything and all the sauce, and then you have the HD remake that looks stunning but lacks the impact and meaning. Furthermore, I don't necessarily resonate with the idea of Eren freeing Ymir. In the original, it felt like Issyama had him tap into Ymir's rage and frustration at her terrible life, and of course, he gets access to her power. This means the whole time as Eren causes chaos, she has not actually been freed, which makes sense as it would be something far more difficult to attain from just a rousing speech. But it would be something she would learn through an honest portrayal of love from Mikasa, something she could actually see with her own eyes. Maybe it's a personal taste thing, but that original resolution felt far more powerful and honest. This one does work, but for me, lacks the depth of the characters by replacing it with simple one-to-one solutions. Moving into part 2, you begin to notice the writing has many problems, which is ironic as the creation of this is supposed to suppress the supposed narrative issues for those who dislike the original ending. No Requiem has definitive plot holes. For example, Eren is presented through framing techniques to genuinely believe that he and his people are different to those on the outside. This rips apart the brilliant dialogue interaction between Reiner and him in chapter 100, which completely smudged the line between the supposed sides. Eren even says to Reiner that he knows they are the same, as he saw the ignorance they were fed when he lived amongst them for that bit of time. This was one of the multiple purposes behind Willy Tybur's war cry to fight Eren, which presented a reflection of his famous line, "Born into this world," as their own justification. But this chapter and dialogue throws all that away, forgetting that nuance of Eren in favor to make him look cool. And I think that's one of my biggest gripes with Eren in this fan ending. He has no depth. He feels incredibly thin and linear. As someone who has attempted to write plenty of stories that will never see the light of day, there is a skill to character writing that differentiates amateurs from seasoned pros. Whenever in charge of a character, we can get too bogged down in trying to create a clear image of goals, motivations, and beliefs. And that's fine, but what it takes away from is the real human feeling characters can have when you don't box them in. Eren initially, as many have talked about, is like a shonen character with a simplistic mindset, naive solutions, and grand goals. He thought he had it all figured out, but over the course of the story, Issyama fleshes him out by having his goals and perspectives grow alongside and on top of his initial ones. For example, he no longer just yearns for his own freedom, but the need to preserve the life of those he has come to love. When we come to this fan ending though, Eren just seems so one-minded that it hurts all the effort that went into making him one of the most complex characters in storytelling. Nevertheless, the characterization of Armin is also all over the place in part 2, which I can get if you're trying to portray him as a frantic and lost individual who is lost in his mind. But that's not the case. In fact, if anything, this chapter shows from the get-go that he has a clearer resolve and understanding than ever before. Frustratingly, Armin also does things he would never do, like physically threaten Eren when his own weakness and insecurities are brought up. For the entire story thus far, he has acted as we'd expect, retreating into his shell about his own ability. When others like Mikasa have been attacked, then yes, he has lost it, as he believes in the worth of certain individuals, particularly these two, over his own. Don't get me wrong, I love the tribute of Armin telling Eren he is going to waste the sacrifices of those who came before. This panel illustrates that point wonderfully. However, the suggestion by some fans that Erwin's sacrifice was pointless in the original ending is detached from the message of the story. It doesn't matter that characters live or die. What matters is the meaning they give when they are here, and how those who knew them remember them. And simultaneously, as rosy and beautiful as Erwin's war speech is, it is presented as nothing but lies by Flock in chapter 84. He says they felt nothing of what the commander spoke of, just fear. This complicates the messaging of those sacrifices being for the greater good, which Armin clarifies in the original ending, by saying that all of our lives matter through what we decide to give meaning, and it doesn't matter if we die so long as we lived meaningfully. A whole part of Attack on Titan has been to tear down this authoritarian messaging of give your life to the cause, the greater good. Your life should be your own, you decide its meaning. Another controversial part is when Armin recites that Eren would never have committed this. Depending on how you view him, the story of No Requiem can continue on. But if you disagree, and believe Eren has had that beast within him before his development to it, then it falls down like a house of cards. For some odd reason, there is a strong refusal by a loud minority to admit Eren from a young age was flawed. I say small because part 2 of the final season exposed the truth really well to the wider public. Regardless, him being flawed doesn't mean wrong, stupid, and dumb. Of course it doesn't, as Eren has grown to become a menacing threat not just because of his power, but intellect. Yet, his outlook and solutions are still twisted. From a young age, unlike many other kids, he turned to violence to murder kidnappers. Certainly self-defense, but his reasoning during and after the fact, where he is emphasizing their lack of humanity, insisting they're beasts, is eye-opening to not just us, but his father. Surely Eren is aware of his actions and how twisted they are. Mikasa even behaves as you'd expect. But he justifies his actions and brushes off his guilt by believing in a twisted way of thinking. And you know what? He'll do it again and again throughout the story, most notably during the famous Freedom panel, where he blinds himself to the death below to believe in something that won't make him accept reality. Eren is flawed. It's part of what makes him such a complex, nuanced character. That demon he became was a part of him more than any other character at the beginning, and it was preventable. At least I potentially think so. But the reality of the world led him to lean into his flaws. With all that being said though, Part 2 does feature some great dialogue work, with Eren throwing the same line Armin has repeatedly said throughout the franchise. Admittedly, it's a moment I wish happened in the original but didn't ever happen. Moments like that, though, are rare in this part and are overclouded by so much left-field drama. A big point of controversy with the original was the Eren and Mikasa romance, and No Requiem not only chooses to change that, but also dabble with the concept of love far more. This is extremely problematic because it breaks the representation of the theme that was so appropriately presented in this story. For the most part, the commentary and development of love has resided within the subtext. Without tooting my own horn, I hadn't seen anyone bring this point up till I mentioned it in my ending analysis, and that being, love is a genuine theme in this dark dystopian fantasy, as it's created not for its developments, but lack of it. The reoccurring absence and underdevelopment of something within a story will then become a theme of its own through the subtext, as it is an established message from the writer, whether they meant it or not. So when Issyama frequently chooses to leave love both sparsely represented and underdeveloped in Attack on Titan, it becomes a message that it exists in this world, but will remain nothing for our characters, as their priority is to push towards more important goals. Conveniently, it almost reminds me of the Game of Thrones line, that love is the death of duty, and vice versa. Regardless, this idea is seen with characters like Erwin. He is the last person you expect the theme of love to appear around. But in chapter 53, there's this dialogue interaction. Suddenly, he admits to Null that he may have loved his wife, though never pursued her due to his greater ambitions and goals. Similarly, Keith Shaders loved Eren's mother, but never pursued her as he was committed to the military and a special destiny. Marlowe loved Hitch, yet he didn't notice it till it was too late. Sasha and Nicolo loved each other, but that never happened due to the cycle of hatred preventing it. Historian Ymir, Bertolt and Annie, Eren and Mikasa. Love is something that is so evidently present as a theme in Attack on Titan before its tragedy, its inability to develop, a theme befitting the complexity of this world. However, No Requiem abandons all of that whole idea that has been built up since the beginning, and is changed in favour of Eren and Historia. This romance is frustrating since it also breaks the main developments of Historia's character in Attack on Titan, to live for herself and no one else. This is completely out of character for her to give up her life like this, especially to someone she doesn't love. Eren is a close friend, but the story makes it very clear that he doesn't love her, nor does she love him. She's only loved Ymir. In the original ending, Historia is taken away from the core plot of the narrative, focusing on her own life with a man she knew from childhood. This means she has taken agency over her story, even in a sense breaking the fourth wall and taking it away from Issyama. I have no clue whether he meant that or not, but it fits so well as it was consistent with the theme of love's representation. We see her cut away from her duty in order for a newfound love to prosper. She's not intertwined with these events anymore. Additionally, another dagger that completely tears up Historia's character in Part 2 of No Requiem is the lack of care for the innocent lives that will be used as pawns and lost in Eren's plan. In No Requiem, she is presented to feel nothing but sadness for Eren. But what about the other people? What about the other innocent lives? She feels nothing of those lives that will be taken, people whose circumstances she should be able to sympathize with most, above any person in the story of Attack on Titan. The original got this perfectly. Historia is frustrated at Eren for the people he will use and hurt, perpetuating a cycle of hatred and damning innocent lives. She knows what it's like to be used as nothing but for this greater idea of a greater cause. But she took agency and control back. No Requiem instead, though, makes her a vapid vessel for plot reasoning. Furthermore, while Eren's emotional breakdown in Chapter 139 was clowned by certain portions of the fanbase, No Requiem, in my opinion, has its own when it dives head deep into this soap opera drama. Clearly, Part 2 of No Requiem messes a lot up for me, but the recently released Part 3 does a lot so well. In fact, this is the best of what No Requiem has to offer, leaning far more on their stunning art and amazing paneling rather than story beats. But even then, what writing is done is far better than previous. Armin's rise to become the commander was some great work that wasn't in the original, and definitely wasn't done as well as this. The cutaways also felt like something you'd see in the anime adaptation. It felt very alive and powerful. Unfortunately though, there's not much else to praise about this part, largely due to it being an action-packed chapter. In terms of problems, I did find myself feeling this kind of happened out of nowhere. But that could be because Jan is one of my favourite characters, so I hope there is at least some sort of explanation instead of just killing him off for effect. I actually also dislike the decision they went with Eren taking away Armin's freedom to act. It's not in line with his character. Though flawed, Eren is principled in his belief system, one of which is to value the freedom of individuals, particularly those he loves. Nevertheless, besides those moments, everything this chapter offered felt clean and satisfying. While Armin comes across as a screaming maniac in part 2, here he comes across as a level-headed commander, which makes sense when the ending resolution of the previous part gave him that resolve. This was a very solid and polished part 3 of No Requiem. Hopefully that continues. Despite that, what is probably most damaging for No Requiem though is the ending it chooses. The conclusion must respect the thematic portrayal of violence and war in this fictional world. Throughout its history, many have tried varying methods to avoid conflict, but it always persists due to forms of violence. Violence has never solved violence. The greatest and most grotesque form of it most definitely shouldn't. This is something the original kept true towards. Perfectly functioning humans outside the world of Attack on Titan should also understand this. It's no moral standard, it's the objective truth of that world and our world. Regardless though of all my analysis of No Requiem's material, the most problematic thing about this whole situation, and why the title of this video includes the word ugly, is because of the commentary surrounding it. The most infuriating thing about No Requiem so far is its own extreme advocates. And to be fair, this goes for anyone on either side of the fanbase, even those who are strongly pro-original. For me, pro-No Requiem advocates come across as disrespectful. And yes, that applies to those who feel the need to put a clarification and add warning of how much they love Issyama, and that them supporting No Requiem is in no way meant as disrespect, but as an expression of love for the franchise, which would be valid. But what's not, is to then proceed and create hysteria through misinformation by claiming that No Requiem is the original ending Issyama planned. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. Big amazing creators have unfortunately pushed this narrative, which is the total abuse of power, and you guessed it, a complete slap in the face of the man you claim to not be disrespecting. In general, these people make it difficult to enjoy and celebrate No Requiem, as these extreme fanboys are being disrespectful. I want this video to only be about me exclaiming my love and criticisms of a detailed alternative fan ending for a franchise I hold dear to my heart, instead of drilling into its unnecessary controversies. Now with that being said, part 1 does a good job of setting up a good alternative conclusion, but part 2 makes me understand why I like the original ending, why each day gets better and better, because it may just be the only way the story could have ended while keeping true to its theme, story and characters. Some may say I'm being harsh, especially on part 2, but understand I believe it has great beats and ideas with some aspects that would still have benefited from being in the original maybe. But the execution leaves a lot to be desired. Fortunately, part 3 of No Requiem kicks it back into focus, into what it does best, action and brilliantly polished drawings that can tap into great emotional beats. I hope you lot found this informative, and please be civil in the comments. This is my No Requiem review and analysis done. Hopefully you enjoyed it.